Yeah. Okay, so I have 10 minutes before I want to take a break, and I want to finish going over the menus. We went over a bunch of the menus already. We went over the window menu. We talked that all the windows or panels are under that menu. We went over the view menu. Visual aids are under the view menu. Visual aids would include zoom in, zoom out, actual size, fit to artboard. We talked about these in our last class. We learned the hotkeys for them. We have rulers here, and we talked about the bounding box today. If you want to control your guides, this is where they're found, under the view menu. It's a visual aid. Guides are a visual aid. If you wanted to turn on the grid, so I'm going to turn on the grid here real quickly. If you want to draw a grid to help you illustrate or organize your content, it's a visual aid. It's found under the view menu. And if I want to turn it off, all I have to do is select hide grid. So all of our visual aids are found under the view menu. The effect menu. The effect menu. You'll notice that there are two categories of effects. Can somebody please tell me what they are? What are the two categories? Illustrator effects and Photoshop effects. There are two distinct categories, and that's really important because they do filter or change the information in a very specific and distinct way. And it's going to be important for us to know the difference. So there is a big difference between Photoshop and effects and Illustrator effects, but we'll talk about that later. But the effects menu has tools that change or distort your graphic with an algorithm. So it's using math to distort it. Does that make sense? Have you guys experimented with effects in Photoshop? Who has? I have. So it's kind of the same idea, okay, but it's in Illustrator. Okay, the select menu, we already talked about it. Is that correct? Right? Okay, the type menu. So the type menu is pretty straightforward. It's just like working in Microsoft Word or I guess Google Docs, right? Look, if I go to font, I can select a different font face. Okay, now Illustrator gives me a little preview of what the font looks like. Okay, so I can pick a different font face. It also tells me the different font types that have been recently used, and I can change my font size. What's the largest size that it shows? 72. 72 is extremely important for a font size. It's not a random number, and we'll talk about that later. So we're going to learn why it's important. 72 is like a golden number in terms of typography. Okay, and then we have a feature called glyphs. Glyphs are special characters that you may not be able to find in your keyboard. So if you're looking for an enye or an umlaut or other characters that you might find in other languages or symbols for currency, this is where it would be located. It's called a glyph. Okay, so the type menu, for the most part, works like a type menu would in Word. Okay, does that make sense? Now, there's also a nice feature that would allow you, like let's say you wrote everything in lowercase, you can select your text and change it to uppercase. Or you can select your text and make it what's called title case, where the first letter is capitalized. So you can swap or change your text through this menu. However, I want you guys all do a favor for me. Do me a favor. Hit Command T. Hit Command T. If you hit Command T, you'll notice that we get a character panel. And the character panel is redundant with the type menu. I like to use the panel instead of the menu. Does that make sense? So, but Command T launches the type panel. Okay? All right, so then we have another menu called the object menu. And the object menu, I like to describe it as having three sort of purposes, three functions. There's three functions to the object menu. One of them is file organization. And file organization is between the term transform and the term show all. So this would be organization. And then the next area is called expanding. And the expanding features are from expand to flatten transparency. Expand to flatten transparency. And then I have features that are unique to the software that changes or alters or prepares your artwork to do something more advanced with it, And that would be from make pixel perfect all the way to graph. So when we start learning more complicated features in the software, we're going to start looking at features in this area. Okay? So, but the object menu has file organization, it has expanding, and it has intermediate to advanced features. Does that make sense? Okay. And then we went over edit. We said that this is where we find the spell checker and copy and paste and undo. And then this is our file menu. The file menu has make a new file, open a file. These are my recent files. So these are universal standards for software. Close, save as, place. We talked about place today. That's under the file menu. Export to different file formats, print. And a real important feature called package that we'll talk about later in the class. Super important. This is about professionalism right here, this term. Okay, so we're going to learn that towards probably about 2/3 into the quarter, but we'll go over it for sure. And then the Illustrator menu, the only real important thing here in the Illustrator menu is the preferences. And you'll notice that the hotkey for the preferences is what? So that's the hotkey for all Adobe products for the preferences. You hit Command K, it's going to launch the preference panel. And so we will start looking at some preferences as we move forward, but the preferences are basically the settings for Illustrator. So these are the settings for it. And you'll notice that there's different categories for how the software works. Okay, and then trying to find the undo. Can't find it. I thought it was in here. I can't see it. Anyhow, preferences under the Illustrator menu. Now there's one menu I didn't go over. That's the help menu. And the help menu has Illustrator help and Illustrator tutorials. But you'll need your Adobe login to access most of those features. But that's what this will do. It'll take you to the Adobe Help Center. And you can actually do a search here as well. And it will take you to it'll take you to that area. See how I typed it, started typing in the feature, and it opened up the menu and then highlighted the layer area for me? So it sort of gives you this little clue of where the feature might be located, right? Let me type in spiral. Hey, you didn't find it? Okay, what about swatches? Swatch library. Swatch colors. So anyhow, it has these little features that help you find information.